Just a quick check for anybody who's on the call. Is the audio okay, and you're seeing the actual shared screen? If you can just well, type into the chat whether or not you're having issues. Okay. Okay. So it sounds like we've got good audio. We can see the screen, which is good. And we're now 5 minutes past, so I would imagine that everybody who's coming has arrived or will be joining us shortly. So really, that's we are recording the session, so they should be able to get caught up fairly quickly. So welcome to our auditing presentation. Like as I said before, my name is Chris Mask. I'm the environmental health and safety practice specialist for EHS Auditing. So for those of you who may be new to Pinchin, we've put up the general kind of description of who we are. So we're a national environmental consultancy, environmental engineering consultancy across Canada, with some locations in the US now. It says 900 total staff. I guess that's probably the best guess on any given day because I believe it has grown a little bit. Approximately 40 offices. I don't believe that includes the field project sites. So we cover a large number of different services, hazardous materials, indoor air quality, occupational health and safety, emissions reduction and compliance. So we've got a pretty well-rounded team, which certainly helps out when we're doing audits. Get the right screen here. So I said, as before, my name is Chris Mask. I've been with Pinchin for about 14 years, in the business for about 20. So we've got a reasonably well experienced team. I think Marcus has been around a little bit longer than myself. Marcus, if you want to.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'll be speaking about EHS auditing for specifically for property managers and building owners a little bit later in the presentation. But yeah, I'm Marcus Anthes, and I'm with the Occupational Health and Safety Group. I've been with Pinchin for 23 years now, and primarily that's been my background since I started with Pinchin. Occupational health and safety kind of started in the industrial hygiene field, and then merged my way into more of the safety services side of things, and program development, EHS compliance auditing. So I'll throw it back to Chris, and I'll speak to you a bit later.
All right, so just quickly going over our agenda. So we're looking at kind of we'll show you the capabilities we've got, discuss the standards somewhat, look at audit structures, discuss legal compliance audits a little bit more, and then get into Marcus's items with EHS fire and life safety auditing services. So looking at our capabilities and, who do we audit? We audit both industrial, commercial. I tend to put institutional sectors in kind of a mix of both, just because of the kind of the different things that they do. So we deal with heavy industrial. So you go into the steel mills, mines, etc. And then you can get into commercial sector where you get into commercial buildings where you've got property managers that are trying to keep track of everything that's going on in their buildings with the individual commercial tenants. So what do we cover? It really depends on kind of what is the client looking for? Are you looking for just OH&S? Are you just looking for environmental? Is it just fire and life safety, or is it a combination? A lot of times clients will have a specific issue with, certainly with fire and life safety. If that's all we're looking for, that's certainly what we can audit for. Um, Dealing briefly with the standards. I'm not going to read all of this. It's so the environmental compliance auditing standard put forth by the CSA group is probably one of the the best documents to kind of structure your environmental compliance audits around. It gives you a pretty good structure as to what to look for. The nice thing with the environmental compliance standard is it does give you kind of a a Coles Notes reminder of, these are the different subject matter that you should be covering. When you get into your subjects that you're looking at air, water, land, kind of how things are taken care of. With respect to compliance auditing, it also does cover, it's compliance auditing, so it applies fairly well to even the health and safety when you're looking at compliance, because it follows that compliance standard. When we get to management systems, so how you're managing your business. So how are we managing the environmental aspects? How are we managing the health and safety aspects, etc. So management systems, the International Standards Organization has a very good program for ISO management or ISO, yeah, ISO management system audits. So that's the 19,011 guideline. So it is a guideline. So it's meant to be flexible. Anybody who's taken the ISO training will tell you that, yeah, it's supposed to be flexible so that it can work for your organization. And it's just really the kind of the standard by which we'll audit any type of management systems. So when we get into the actual subject matter. So if we're looking at an environmental management system, so the ISO standard also has a specific standard for the environmental programs, which just helps to make it a little bit more specific to, environmental systems, because they do differ a little bit from health and safety. When you get into health and safety, ISO 14001, it'll deal with how you're managing your health and safety system. It's a really good system to follow, even if you're not ISO registered. That you can go through and kind of follow the cookbook to kind of remind yourself these are all the things we should be doing, so that we're following the plan, do, check, act cycle. We're giving ourselves an ability to keep our management system current and react to items as they appear, and in some cases, give yourself an ability to anticipate potential aspects in the future. So really, when we're talking about auditing, where one of the key points is determining the scope, making sure we know what the boundaries of the audit are. What does the client need? Certainly, if you're looking for a health and safety audit, I don't need to be auditing a bunch of environmental standards for you, and vice versa. If you're only looking for, let's say you have some sort of a tank farm or tanks at your facility, and you're just concerned with, okay, well, we've installed these quite a number of years ago, and we're concerned with, okay, well, are these up to the current standard? Kind of a case in point, if we've got commercial buildings with emergency backup power, they're going to have tanks that fuel those generators. How are they being managed? How are we checking on the generators? How are we checking on the tanks? Is the fuel being handled safely? Because really, the last thing we want to have is a fuel leak that could impact not only the emergency power, but the occupancy of the building. Certainly, if you've got fuel leaking, you're going to have to get it cleaned up. Then looking at what's included, what's excluded. Sometimes we're looking at systems. We may be specifically excluding a unit because maybe that tenant will submit their own audits. We may be excluding them just because we're trying to keep our scope under control. I have a number of facilities that, when you're doing audits, sometimes if we're doing it the first time, we're kind of saying, well, if I've got 900 sites across the country, do I really want to, put all of them through an audit right away, or do we want to use maybe pick 3 sites and do audits on those, and then roll out a more robust program once we've kind of got some lessons learned from the initial auditing exercise. Um, then really important is what criteria is being proposed. It's something that can be a little bit frustrating as an auditor. You've really got to do your homework with the client and make sure that when we're kicking this project off, that we're very clear that when we're doing a legal compliance audit, we're not necessarily looking at your management system. Certainly there's something to be said that if I'm doing a legal compliance audit and I notice something that could be helpful in your management system, I would certainly note that to a client. And if need be, we can put that in as an opportunity for improvement. Typically it doesn't get put down as a compliance item because your management system is normally not a compliance item. um, and vice versa. If I'm looking at your management system, there is certainly an aspect of how you treat legal compliance, how you're checking on legal compliance, what you're doing to keep yourself up to date. But it's not intended to be a full legal compliance audit. While we're doing the kind of the checks on your system, we may discover that there is some potential non-compliances. Certainly that is something that would be noted during the audit and relayed to the client, just to make sure that that it's there. It's not necessarily in your scope, but it's something that you're going to kind of need to deal with. So it makes sense that we mention it. And yeah, just getting an idea of jurisdictional issues. A big thing, and it can kind of sneak up on you with some commercial buildings, is that if you've got a big plaza, you may have a federal office inside that plaza. So while everybody else in the plaza is following the provincial rules and regulations, that federal agency may also have to look at, okay, well, the federal rules and then which provincial rules would apply based on the agency. It's one of the, I guess, the less understood portions with auditing, I guess, bodies or parts of the federal government is depending on the ministry, there will be a kind of ministerial direction that will direct their facilities, their operations as to which provincial regulations apply and which provincial regulations they're going to apply crown immunity to and just use the federal. So it's always good to make sure as early in the process as we can. Certainly with Pinchin, we'll send out a cost proposal and outline kind of a scope. If there's anything in there where you think, okay, well, this should be excluded because we treat this a slightly different way, or so a lot of times we'll be looking at some fire code issues that get kind of roped into environmental compliance audits just due to the fact that, well, how are we storing chemicals and are we making sure that they're, if you're causing a fire, you're going to be causing some sort of a release. So some facilities will look at a specific fire safety audit that will cover those scoped items so that we wouldn't necessarily have to do them. And then making sure we've got a good plan, kind of from the scope and the discussions with the client, making sure that we know what's being covered. We've got proper auditors on the site. Certainly some facilities, for example, if we're going to be auditing a facility that does a lot of hoisting and rigging, we want auditors with experience on that. There are cases where, yeah, we bring in a specific expert. to deal with the subject matter, and that way we can, ask them what they need to ask, and be a little bit more efficient with it. Um, Timing, getting a good handle on how long is it going to take to go through the facility to see the items that need to be seen. Are there any documents that we can retrieve ahead of time to kind of speed up the process, so the auditors are a little bit better prepared when they get there? They may have reviewed some of the documents already, so they've got a good idea what they're looking at, and some of the more intricate details of your facility. Um, what Simple things like what kinds of IT connections are required, how long are we planning for lunch and breaks and stuff like that. Are we planning our day to start at the right time? A lot of industrial facilities do tend to start a little bit earlier than maybe a commercial facility. So making sure that we're not inadvertently coming in and scheduling an audit to go from 8 till 5 when the facility normal work time is like 5:30 or 6 in the morning until 3. We want to make sure that we kind of create as little chaos as possible with the audits. Audits can be very consuming for the auditee. You've still got regular jobs to do, and you've still got to manage the auditors and get them the information. So anything that we can kind of review ahead of time, anything that we can kind of go over ahead of time as an auditor, I feel that's very helpful. Um, and then keeping a little bit of time set aside for those, at the end of the day, those things that, okay, well, it's going to take a little bit more time to get that record. Or if we require, let's say we need to talk to a maintenance manager about the PM schedule on some tanks, we need to schedule that. If it's a maintenance manager, a lot of times they're doing maintenance in the facility, or they're doing the regular PMs, making sure that we've got time to speak with that individual. So what do we have? What are we using as audit criteria? So management systems, we're looking at your system and conformance to the system. So how is the facility conforming to what we've written down in our management system? Are we doing the audits, the internal audits and checks that we're saying we're doing? Are we doing the reviews of the policies that we say we're doing? Are we doing the reviews of the legislation to keep our legal and other registry tables up to date? These are the things that we're really checking for in management system audits. Are you doing compliance checks? What's required? So that's where we talk about conformance. So when we're talking about management system audits, we're saying we're conforming to the management system. When we talk about compliance audits, we're talking about we're complying with the legislated or corporate rule. It is important to look. I suppose I kind of missed it during the scoping section, that, yeah, most of the time facilities are looking for, legal compliance. We're looking at these regulations, and these are the regulations that we want to audit ourselves against. Companies will oftentimes have corporate rules to say, okay, well, yeah, I know that this is the minimum legal standard and we've got to meet that, but we want to hold ourselves to a higher standard, so we have this rule in place. Very important that we get these any type of corporate rules that we're going to be using to the auditors in advance, so that the auditors can actually take some time and look at them, and that way we know when we're at the site, this is exactly what we're looking for. As an auditor, there's nothing worse than the last day. It's well, we need these corporate rules looked at as well, and it's like, well, that's not in our scope, and it would have been nice to hear about it ahead of time. Um, so evidence, yeah, audits are very evidence based. It's nice that you say you pick up your waste, that you say you ship it out every 2 months. Um, I actually want to see the manifests to prove that it's going out every 2 months. You should have some sort of evidence to say you're doing that. PM schedules. Um, you should have records of your maintenance, so that you can say, this is what we got. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. Um, Visual observations, yeah, we're certainly looking at, for evidence of leaks and spills and stuff like that. Evidence of cleanup practices, and then statements from facility staff. This is, pardon me, something that's a little bit glossed over, I find, with a lot of facilities is, if I'm looking at a spills procedure, and maybe it's not very well documented, but I go out and I'm asking independently each one of the, regular staff members from the floor, okay, well, what's your procedure? And they're reciting it, step by step, and it's all matching. You've got a procedure. So looking at it, do you have a procedure? Yeah, you've got a procedure. Is it, pardon me, is it maybe as well documented as it should be? No. And that's where you get kind of an opportunity for improvement, or a kind of a lower level finding with respect to a management system audit. Because we certainly want to avoid majors if they're not justified, right? Um, So audit findings. So, what did we see? We want to be very clear with what we saw, where we saw it, making sure that we're documenting where we saw it. So you can go back in your facility and you can identify, this is where we saw it. Are pictures allowed? Certainly, if you allow for pictures, it means we can put a picture in there that illustrates where it was and what we saw at the time. It's particularly good for sites where maybe somebody slopped something and left, but the next shift came in and they cleaned it up and they wandered away. And it's like, okay, well, it's good that you've got the process that they're cleaning it up. But what we want to kind of address is okay, well, um, some people are missing it, and we want to make sure that gets corrected, because long term that tends to lead to spills. Uh, Very important to state the actual legal citation, making sure that we're listing the act and regulation, so that you as a client can kind of go back to it and see, okay, well, this is what the regulation actually says. Because it makes things a whole lot clearer if you can look at that. If there's a particular legal issue, you may want to, well, it's well advised for any type of serious issue to review it with your legal counsel, so that they can kind of look at it as well, and you can get, okay, well, this is how we would need to proceed. Um, yeah, be concise. Anybody who's doing audits, even if you're doing your internal audits, we don't need to hear the whole story about the finding. We need to see, this is what we found. This is what we found. This is what the regulation says. This is what we need to do to fix it. Um, so making sure that we have practical recommendations in there. Now, sometimes you'll get into a case where, yeah, it's going to take a little bit more thinking about how the facility actually fixes a problem. And those are cases where, you're generally stating, this is what this is what the regulation requires, and this is what we need to do to move forward. But realizing that it may be something that takes a little bit more for the facility to close an item out. Uh, Something with respect to that, a lot of tank problems, because they're covered under technical standards and safety authority, short of having to replace something that doesn't meet the current standard, you may be able to apply for a variance to the TSSA to look after a problem like a minor non-compliance type deal, so that you can still operate the tanks while you look at, you know um, kind of infrastructure renewal in the future. Because there's no sense, correcting a minor issue and only finding out that, well, that tank was going to be retired in a couple of years anyways. You'd rather, okay, get your minor variance and deal with it for the couple of years, and then get everything corrected when you replace the tanks. And then putting your findings in context. So all auditors should be able to say, okay, well, what's a high risk, low risk, medium risk? With respect to this, Yeah, so if you got some sort of administrative non-compliance, typically those fall into the low category, unless it's something that, you were supposed to file this paperwork and you haven't filed this paperwork and you repeatedly don't file this paperwork on time, then it tends to get kicked up into a medium because that's the way that the ministry is going to treat you. If they're seeing repeated actions of non-compliance, they tend to escalate you. Or you've got low, you've got administrative non-compliance, but you're seeing it at, 18 facilities. You may want to escalate that, just to say, okay, well, we're seeing more of a systemic problem. These are items, and then high, anything that's going to be kind of an immediate concern with respect to health and safety, anything that's going to cause an injury to the worker or a potential fatality. You really want to get on top of those. But it is worthwhile, yeah, making sure that we're keeping those risk ratings consistent with what the facility expects as well. So if you've got a facility criteria to use, certainly making sure your auditor's aware of that so that we can fit those in appropriately is helpful. Okay. So yeah, just quickly looking at major non-compliances are high. Anything that's a fatality, critical injury, anything that's going to cause a spill to the environment, anything that you have to report. Discharges to this inadvertent discharges of wastewater to kind of a stormwater infrastructure would typically get a high rating, just because that's going to be considered a release by the ministry. Um, your non-compliance with regulations that could maybe give you something that's potentially going to happen. Those are certainly serious. But yeah, they're not as important, or they're all important, but they're not as I guess a high risk as the high ones. And then administrative non-compliances. That's a pretty typical one, and it's a typical one that the ministry will find when they come to see your site is you maybe potentially have the wrong date on a piece of paper or something like that, or you're a little bit late filing a report. You've got the report done, so they're going to look at it and say, okay, well, you're not causing any adverse effect. So they tend to give you a little bit of a pass on it as long as you get your documentation in. So legal compliance, yeah, really we're looking at the law. We're looking at the laws and the rules of the companies. So you're kind of holding yourself up against it and making sure that you're meeting your compliance requirements. So why are we doing legal compliance audits? Yeah, some clients require it. You're just looking for, best practices. Risk mitigation. Yeah, we want to catch a problem before it happens. Regulatory requirements in some source protection areas. Facilities are required to have third-party audits. In some kind of higher intensity and industrial sources will also be required to do it as well. Some of it's just to put management at ease. If you're an environmental or a health and safety manager and you're looking at a facility and you're maybe raising an issue, it's, sometimes management wants a second opinion by, somebody who doesn't have as vested an interest in the facility. Just that third party sometimes is easy to put things to bed. To put the workforce at ease, it's as alarming as we're being audited is. A lot of times the workforce is understanding that, hey, the company is actually doing a third party audit. They're looking to try to solve the problems. So you can put a fairly positive spin on it. I've had sites where we have as part of the audit team, we have a union representative that comes around and helps us out. They're very helpful to kind of direct you to what the employees really do at the site. Also, workforce turnover. This one's becoming a lot more important as we see that a lot of the environmental health and safety folks are, there's a good number of them that seem to be retiring at this point in their careers. So you've got new folks coming in. A lot of times, yeah, the new folks are looking for, hey, let's do kind of a third party audit and figure out, okay, well, where are we really at? Have we been missing anything? They certainly don't want to miss anything, and certainly it can be um, a good training exercise for newer staff. You're new to the role. It's good to go through. Okay, now you know what the questions are. It's better to be maybe struggling a little bit with your auditor in finding records, but then you kind of learn where they are. If the ministry's kind of standing there and tapping their foot, waiting for records to be produced, it's certainly a different scenario, right? So having your workforce just kind of get a little bit of extra experience and being kind of looked at by an auditor, and then looking for improvements. Facilities who have ISO registered systems, they're a lot of what they're doing is just double checking. We're checking to see, okay, well, are we meeting industry standard? Are there best practices that we could be picking up on? Are there, things that could make us better? Financial benefit, yeah. If people aren't getting hurt, you're not losing time. You're reducing incidents, reducing maintenance costs, insurance costs, legal consequences. So regulator fines. Nobody really wants to be that company that gets fined, that company that gets, put in the paper because it goes to your kind of your reputation, right? Everybody sees them from time to time. You see in the paper or whatever news you're getting, so and so has gotten fined for this type of activity or that type of activity. We don't want to be in that. And ultimately, yeah, your legal defense costs. Everybody knows that lawyers cost money. And it's if you can avoid having to pay them any more than you have to, that's certainly a benefit. Um, so what does a typical compliance audit entail? So you look at an opening meeting. This is typical to a management system audit will work similarly as well. So you'll have an opening meeting. Typically, I like to go with site inspections, being able to see what's going on. Once we've kind of got the laydown of the land, kind of digging into interviews and records review. A lot of times you can do very quick informal interviews while you're doing your site inspection. Just ask the required questions, and that way there's no need to pull them into an office afterwards and grill them. It's easier to see, okay, well, how are they actually handling the material on the site? Sometimes just watching them do the process they're normally working at answers a lot of questions, and it reduces interview time and disruption to the facility. Once we've had a chance to kind of look at everything, dig through the records, that's where we're identifying gaps. Is there missing evidence? Is there stuff that we need to go looking at? Um, are there any open items that we're going to have to maybe schedule another visit or schedule kind of follow up for? Findings preparation. It's always good to have a little bit of findings preparation with the audit team on site. That way, everybody's got an idea of kind of what's going on. You're not surprising anybody with findings in the closing meeting. Closing meeting, identifying the kind of the any type of open issues, presenting draft findings, and then giving everybody an idea. Okay, timelines for the report, timelines for any comments from the facility. So this one we just kind of showed a kind of a sample of the typically what we find in our findings tables, just to give everybody an idea. We like to rank them. Obviously you want to put the higher risk items up at the top. anything that's non-compliance up at the top, opportunities for improvement. Either put them on a separate table or, put them to the bottom according to rank. Show the citation. Where's the act? What's the act? What's the regulation? If there's a code, what's the code? What does it say? So what section are we dealing with? And then describe the findings and then give kind of clear recommendations. And then follow up is really mandatory. If you want to see any benefits from your auditing system, is making sure that you're going through your findings and you're closing them off. You can ask the auditor. We're proposing this solution. Will this close it off? Your auditor should be able to tell you yes or no, or it may require more discussion, but typically auditors are more than happy with helping you close off items. That's kind of what we do. This is why we do it. Is we do like helping. Sometimes I feel bad when I've made I'm seeing findings, but ultimately it's nice to know that, okay, well, I found it, so now they can fix it, and hopefully we won't find it again. So I guess I'll hand off to Marcus.
Thanks, Chris. If you want to stop sharing, I can share my screen because I've made a few minor tweaks. So. Okay, just a thumbs up, Chris, if you can see that first slide.
I can see the first slide.
Okay, great. So one thing we didn't mention at the beginning of this is we'll try to leave a little bit of room left for questions, and my section shouldn't take too long. So we're at about 22 now. So I'll try to leave about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of mine for questions. And if you'd like to just put your questions in the chat, we can address them. So switching gears a little bit, this is still EHS compliance auditing, but as opposed to what Chris was talking about, we're typically looking at a fixed facility. Usually it's an industrial manufacturing facility, for example, when we're coming in to do a compliance audit. So it's one employer, multiple employees, and we are auditing based on basically the employer's responsibilities, or the both in terms of occupational health and safety and the environment, as opposed to where we have property managers, for example, which is what I'm going to talk about next. Property managers or owners, where there could be very large portfolio of different buildings that they're managing, that they still need to ensure that there's going to be environmental health and safety compliance. So we have some clients that we've been helping out ensure they are in compliance with the rules and regulations. So it's the same type of things we're looking at in terms of regulations, standards, codes, but it's more from the viewpoint of the risk of that property manager or building owner. It could also apply to other workplaces where there may be multiple sites. So if there's no property managers or building owners on this call, not a big issue. It would still apply to the same type of auditing style that we're using for these. So this is about 12-ish, 13 years old that we started doing this for clients. It really started out with building owners, Standard Life, property managers, Colliers, back in 2013, where we helped them develop basically a checklist style auditing protocol, where it looked at both occupational health and safety, environmental, and also looked at fire and life safety systems as well. So we had a lot of success with that pretty high level auditing checklist style, where again, we're still looking for the same types of things, and we're still citing regulatory citations and coming up with relative risk and recommendations. But it was meant to look at, again, what's the risk of that property manager? And although it could be, 90% tenant controlled, as to the risks, still from the eye of the property manager, they need to know what their tenant's doing in terms of their risk. So we look at it based on that. So it started off with developing this style, this protocol, and then looking into really further elements of that in terms of developing, like if we see gaps, for example, it led into developing, full EHS management systems, full individual procedures, programs. And that could lead up to, say, 20 to 25 different individual procedures that would be needed for a company to ensure that they're following the rules that we may have found as deficiencies in some of the audits. That then turns into ensuring that your legal registries are up to date. If you're not sure what a legal registry is, it's really just a set of a list of the applicable regulations and standards and codes, depending on whether it's environmental, occupational health and safety, fire and life safety. So because standards change, we need to ensure that we're rolling with the punches on that and making sure that we're up to date on those regulatory requirements. Within these audits, we've also incorporated certain tenants that may be considered higher risk, meaning from a property manager's point of view, what are my tenants doing? Are they industrial tenants? Are they commercial tenants? Are they retail tenants? All having various levels of risk. For example, if we've got an industrial tenant that has high volumes of flammable liquids, combustible liquids, gases, they're at a higher risk of potentially not complying with the rules and regulations, potential spills to the environment. We could have even tenants that are restaurants. So there's higher fire risk in restaurants, for example, if there's, grease fires and things like that. So depending on that type of tenant, depending on that type of occupancy, we may be looking a little bit more specifically at that tenant, and it can either be incorporated into the base building audit that we do, or it could be a separate report altogether that we would call, say, a high-risk tenant inspection report. So we've also, within that audit format, once we send the findings to the report to the property manager, what action needs to be done. So whatever kind of method that the property manager uses to track their health and safety and environmental compliance issues kind of varies across the board. There's some pretty good software companies out there that we've dealt with on different fronts. They all have different kind of formats, but it's really just a matter of usually that organization purchasing the rights to the software, and then that's the way that they would manage that. So there's systems out there like 40. There's used to be RiskWise. I believe that's changed to EHS. The name escapes me. There's Velocity EHS is what I was trying to think of. So there's a number of different providers out there, and they're able to basically manage your EHS management system. So what we would do as Pinchin is, once we've given the general report to the property manager, we can become users for this software, and we would upload those findings to the software, which would then get fed to the property managers or building operators for their action. So there's that, as well as just the kind of traditional auditing tools where we'll send the report and kind of do a follow-up, as Chris was mentioning, to to see that things have gotten corrected. I should mention also that these audits are kind of living, running, happening year after year, kind of depending on the risk level of what we're seeing from certain properties. will depend on kind of the frequency that that property manager wants to have audits conducted. Usually it's an annual thing, could be every 2 years, again, just depending on the level of risk. So these are the things that we're looking for. I think it's pretty self-explanatory when you're looking at compliance, whether it be health and safety or environmental. There's these aspects that we're going to be focusing on. So this has basically been put into our audit checklist template. So our auditors will be going out in the field and they'll be doing their walkarounds, and they'll be looking for these various things that will then transpose into the audit report. So when we're setting up an audit, we again, it's usually a large portfolio. We'll have, say, I don't know, anywhere between 20 to 50 buildings that we're going to audit throughout the year. So we'll have the contact information, property managers, building operators, and then we'll set up the audit based on the fact that your employer has retained Pinchin to come in to conduct the environmental, health and safety, fire, life safety audit. And so we'd like to set up that visit with you. By this time, we already have a little bit of preliminary knowledge just from the property manager's own internal EHS management system. So we have a lot of information already in place. Now we just want to put that boots to the ground, visit that particular facility, and look to see that they're in compliance with the things that we're going to be checking for. So we'll usually call or email the property manager and just give them a bit of a preliminary, here's what we're doing. If it's a repeat audit, they already are quite familiar with what Pinchin's going to be in there doing. So we want to set up with the building operator how we're going to go about doing that audit. So we'll ask to be escorted by a person at the facility who is familiar with it. So it's typically a building operator. We would like to see more property managers out there. But nevertheless, we know everybody's busy. They may have large portfolios, but as long as there's a building operator, somebody who's familiar with that facility to take our auditor around, that's kind of the first step of the audit, where we're going to be doing a physical workplace walkthrough inspection. Again, we're looking at property management controlled areas more so than anything else. So things like mechanical rooms, electrical rooms, life safety, sprinkler rooms, loading docks, rooftops, things where building operators may have to access in addition to giving access to contractors. So we want to make sure that these things are within compliance, and I'll show you a few examples of some more of the common findings that we have in a bit. But we're looking at things like, are your fire and life safety systems being properly maintained, inspected, tested by either a fire company, or are they being done internally? So these are the things that we want to look at. So in conjunction, of course, with the walkthrough inspection, any audit, you're going to be doing a documentation review as well. A little bit more applicable to these larger comprehensive audits, where we're looking at one fixed facility, employer run, where we're looking more so at the workers and the employees of that workplace, as opposed to a property management building, which could be a multi-complex strip mall. It could be a high-rise commercial building. It could be a tenant-run industrial manufacturing facility. So it's going to vary as to what we're looking at. So when it comes to the documentation review, we usually provide a list as to what we'd like to see ahead of time. This is basically a list of what we're looking for. Really, documentation comes down to, does this workplace have proper procedures and policies in place? Are there the people that are working in this facility adequately trained? So if it's a tenant-run facility, we're not necessarily looking at what the employer is responsible for that tenant, because that's not who's retaining us to do the audit. We'll be walking through to the extent of what the property manager risks are. But if we're not looking specifically at, let's say, an employer has a bunch of confined spaces within their workplace that they operate, they own, they're responsible for, they would be responsible for having their own confined space inventory and assessments and plans and permits and that kind of thing, as opposed to, while the property manager has an interest to know that there are potential confined spaces on that site, it's more of the employer's responsibility to ensure that the regulation is complied with. Now, if you're looking at something in the same line as, say, a high-rise facility, where there may be, in the same line of confined spaces, if that's what we're looking at, there could be some pits, for example, in the parking garages or in the the underground areas where there's no specific, like the tenants in that commercial building are not going to be responsible for those. So it would be the property manager in this case. So we would be focusing more on, are these identified appropriately, and do you have proper plans in place? So we're looking at these kind of things, and then further into the documentation, it's really going to be more site specific. Life, fire, and safety systems. Usually the documentation is a tag, or it's some sort of way bill or inspection invoice that we can look at to ensure that the life and fire safety systems are all up to date on inspections and testing. We're looking at hazardous materials for buildings. There's kind of two realms there. There's the general hazardous building materials that could be in buildings in terms of what sometimes we'll call designated substances, things like asbestos, lead, silica, mercury, where there's regulations behind. If you've got renovations and demolition going on, then you need to have a designated substance assessment conducted, as opposed to, or not as opposed, but kind of in conjunction with a separate regulation that deals with asbestos. So if you've got asbestos in your buildings, you need to make sure that, first of all, it's identified, and then there's an asbestos management plan, and the regulation requires that annual reassessments take place as well. So it's something that we'll be checking for in terms of documentation when we come to visit that facility. We're also looking at environmental permits. You could have air permits that are applicable that we'd be looking for. If you've got anything that has a stack and you could be emitting that's going into the outdoor, then you're likely going to need an environmental compliance approval or an ESER or an exemption to say that you don't need it. So these are the kind of things that we're looking for. This is what our typical audit checklist style report will look like. Again, it's kind of broken down into three big topics of health and safety, environmental, fire and life safety, and kind of like what Chris was showing in the report style for the other types of audits that we do. You're going to have the finding. If there was a finding, you're going to have the regulatory citation. If applicable, you'll have a photo, and then the relative risk, usually low, medium, high again, and then the recommendation. Just a few last points. There's more or less more common findings that we see in buildings that we audit in terms of property managed buildings. This is not to say that this is a very, very quick few examples of many things that we do see, but these are some of the more common ones. Fixed ladders, for example, in the industrial establishments regulation, fixed ladders need to extend more than 3 feet or 90 centimeters above the landing of a roof. So we see a lot of these roof hatches where, for practical purposes, you can't really extend that ladder through the roof hatch because the roof hatch is in the way. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that it's not a non-compliance with that regulation. So if we see this, we'll note it, but we also want to be able to give you some sort of recommendation to say that if it's not practical to be able to extend that ladder side rail through the roof hatch, then can we do something where it's going to be an equivalent to have as if that ladder side rail is extended? So we'll recommend either having a guardrail on the exterior of the roof, or some sort of handhold or handle to be able to grab a hold of so that you can safely get on and off that roof through that hatch. And that is kind of the reason and the implication for that regulation in the first place. So we see a lot of these on property managed roofs. Some other ones that we'll see a lot of storage tends to happen in electrical rooms where we're storing things up against electrical panels. Relatively low risk depending on what that storage is. If we've got a bunch of combustible material up against electrical panels, then we would tend to maybe lift that relative risk a little bit higher and call that a medium risk. If there's a few items stored in an electrical room, we'll keep it as a low risk. And then the same kind of thing with the example in the bottom of propane cylinders. See a lot of propane issues in a lot of buildings. Sometimes it's a relatively low risk. We're looking at the propane handling and storage code when it comes to propane storage. The big bullets here are propane needs to be stored outdoors, needs to be in a secure cage. The cage needs to be labeled accordingly and specifically with a no smoking sign. So if we see little infractions on that, we'll note these. And then again, depending on that risk, if there's a bunch of propane stored, it's stored on its side, it's stored with other incompatible flammable materials, then we'll typically up that risk a little bit. And then we see tank issues as well, and some other air and environmental issues where, again, I think I mentioned earlier that if we've got anything that exhausts to the outdoors, you want to make sure that you at least check to see that you may need an ESA or an ECA for that piece of equipment. There's always exemptions as well. So as long as it's being checked and you can show verification that it has been checked, you should be good to go. So I kind of rushed through the end of that, but that's the quick and dirty of overall the EHS auditing services, and apologize for not leaving a lot of time for questions, but we will open it up now to any questions that you might have.
I suppose everybody's muted right now, so if you want to raise your hand, then we can unmute you and you can ask your question.
Or alternatively, you can type it into the chat.
That works as well. Oh. Okay, so we've got a question. Can the fire safety plan and emergency response plan be integrated into a single document?
Great question. And I kind of flipped through that quickly. There's certain criteria for when you need an approved fire safety plan. And when I say approved fire safety plan, that's something that needs to go through your local fire department to get approved by the chief fire official. So when I say criteria, there's a whole whack of different criteria, but the big bullet points are if you've got over 500 liters of flammable liquids within your facility, you'd require an approved fire safety plan. If the building is more than 3 stories, including the basement, you require an approved fire safety plan. There's certain occupancies that are always going to require one, like assembly occupancies, restaurants. That's an indication, well, you require an approved fire safety plan. It's not to say that if you don't require that, you don't need a plan. You still need some sort of emergency response plan, fire safety plan. In that case, you can easily combine an emergency response plan into a fire safety plan. The difference is that if you do need an approved fire safety plan, it's just a bit more detailed, and you do need to submit that to the fire official. And it does need to be reviewed on an annual basis. If there's no changes, and it's something else that we're going to be looking at in an audit, we'll be looking to see if it's reviewed. And if you can say, well, there's been no changes to our facility, but we haven't reviewed it in 3 years, then that's all good and well. Just make sure you document somewhere that you have reviewed it. And so I've kind of digressed into the annual requirements, but hopefully that answers your question on whether the two can be combined or not. It's going to be dependent on the occupancy and the criteria.
Okay, we got any other questions? Not seeing anything.
I don't see any in the chat.
Nope.
I don't see any more in the Q&A. So, oh,
Nope.
do I need to have a certificate or experience in order to conduct EHS audits? Another good question. Experience, definitely.
Yes.
You don't necessarily need a certificate if you're not doing one of these management systems that are management system audits where you do need another higher level of training and a certificate for that. It really does kind of come down to experience. It should be a qualified person doing it. So I'll let Chris speak to this as well. If we're talking specifically about occupational health and safety, then we'd like to see experience in terms of designation. Maybe it's a CRSP, maybe it's a CIH or an ROH. But that just, there's no definite behind that. You don't necessarily need to have a designation to do that. There's certain environmental criteria that helps as well. I'll let Chris speak to that because he has it.
Yeah, so if you're doing anything with respect to your management system audits, yes, you do need to be trained. Otherwise, the management system registrar in your surveillance audit or your registration audit will flag you as a major for not having qualified staff. So best companies to get that from are typically registrars that provide it. British Standards Institute (BSI) has a very good program. They offer it in sections, so they'll train you just to be an internal auditor, to be a lead auditor, or for any one of the various standards. So the nice thing is when you take the auditor's course, there's a little exam at the end. You finish it, you get a little certificate that you can show to any of the registrars to say that you've taken the course and you're qualified according to the course material that was taught. If you've taken the auditor's course, you don't need to retake it to take another standard. So if you've taken the EMS standard, the 14,001, yeah. So you've taken that. You want to do health and safety audits to help out with your management system there. Then you can take the 45,000 section to cover off those. So it's not like you're having to go through the whole process again. As far as compliance audits goes, no, you don't necessarily have to have any type of specific qualifications because a lot of people can actually, read the regulations and say, okay, well, if it says that this sign has to be red on a white background, then yeah, it has to be red on a white background. So there's no strict need to be certified that way. It's just it makes it a whole lot easier if if you've got some experience, and the more experience you pick up over time, it makes things a whole lot easier as an auditor. You're having to do a lot less in the way of checks. Certainly, you're always double checking your work to make sure that something hasn't changed yesterday and you haven't read that update to the regulation yet. But certainly, you tend to pick up on the big ticket items pretty quickly. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay. Are there any other questions? I know we've kind of gone over our time limit here, so we'll stick around if there's more questions. But if you need to hop off, thank you for attending.
And if there's any follow-ups, I believe our contact information should have been in the webinar invite. But don't hesitate to reach out to Chris or I if you need anything, if you'd like to have an audit conducted at your facility, or if you have any, again, follow-up questions, just don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay. Okay. Yes, that's I think we've answered everybody's questions, and looks like everybody's finishing up here.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Marcus.
See you later.
Thank you to everybody who came.